My name's Lena. I'm 28 years old. And I've learned that people don't always mean what they say, especially when it comes to family. You can give your heart to people who only care about their own reflection. And sometimes, the thing they throw away so easily is the very thing you never stopped holding on to. That ring, and what happened to it changed everything before everything changed. Life was quiet and in some ways, beautifully small. I grew up in a modest house, on the edge of town, with a patchy lawn and a creaky front step that my dad never quite got around to fixing. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, at least in the way people meant when they said comfortable, to avoid talking about money. My parents worked hard. They were the kind of people who always had somewhere to be, something to prove. My father was in sales, chasing commissions and keeping score in his head even when he pretended not to. My mother was a perfectionist in every sense: appearance, tone, manners. If you weren't smiling in the family photo, she'd say, "Can you just pretend to be happy for once?" And she wouldn't be joking. But my grandmother, my mom's mother, was different. She was the softness in my childhood. The only one who didn't ask me to be anything other than present. Every Friday afternoon, she'd invite me to her small garden patio for tea. I was just a kid, but she never talked down to me. She asked real questions, like, "What did you feel today?" Not what I learned or what grade I got, what I felt. And I answered, because she made it feel safe too. Those afternoons are what I remember most from my childhood, not the holidays or birthdays or report cards, but the smell of warm mint from her tea kettle, and how the late sun would hit the stones in her ring, lighting up her hand as it rested near mine. That ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was part of her. When I was little, I asked her why she always wore it, even when gardening. She smiled and said, "It's not for show. It's a reminder. I wear it to remember what matters, even when no one's looking." I didn't understand it then. Not fully, but something about that stuck with me. My sister Rachel was 4 years younger than me. And from as early as I can remember, she was the golden one. She was brighter, louder, funnier, the one who caught attention at every gathering without trying. People said she had sparkle. She knew how to perform, how to charm. I don't blame her for that. It's how she survived in our family, but it also meant that whenever she was in the room, I faded into the wallpaper. I was the quiet one, the mature one, the one who handled her own problems, did her homework without being asked, remembered to pack her own lunch. The one who didn't need much, or at least that's how they saw me. What my parents never seemed to notice was that I did need things. Just different things. I didn't want praise or presents, I wanted to be seen. I wanted someone to notice when I was overwhelmed or lonely, or when I'd gone a week without sleeping well. But in our house, being low maintenance meant being invisible, and invisible was easier for them. There were small signs, even back then. Rachel would throw tantrums and get ice cream as a peace offering. I'd hold in my tears and be told I was strong. At Christmas, we'd both make lists. She always got what she asked for, sometimes even more. I'd get a few things my mom thought were practical. Socks, a new backpack, shampoo, and my favorite scent. If she remembered, it wasn't cruel. It was efficient. They assumed I didn't need the same care because I didn't demand it. But being easy to manage isn't the same as being okay. And the truth is, over time, I taught myself not to ask for much because asking never changed anything. My grandmother was the exception. She noticed the little things. Like how I always paused before speaking, or how I'd tug at my sleeve when I was nervous. She noticed when my smiles didn't quite reach my eyes. And more than once, she told me, "You have the quiet kind of strength that doesn't shout, but it holds, and it sees." I clung to those words like a life raft. Especially during the years when I felt like I was just filling space in my own home. She used to tell me that one day, the ring would be mine, not in a grand way, just gently. "You'll have this after me. You'll understand what it means." And I did. Even as a teenager, I knew it wasn't about the ring itself. It was about what she saw in me, and the bond we shared that no one else seemed to notice. I never told my parents. She'd said that. It felt private, sacred, and maybe some part of me already knew they wouldn't care. They didn't understand the weight of small things. They liked shiny, loud, visible achievements, public successes, performances, symbols they could show off. To others, not the quiet dignity of something like that ring. When she passed, I was 22. I was still living at home for a few months before grad school, and I remember sitting alone in her apartment the day after the funeral. My mom was too busy organizing the food for guests to grieve. My dad didn't say much at all. Rachel took selfies with the flowers, but I just sat on the old garden chair, where we used to share tea, and cried without wiping my face. That day, I told myself, I'll keep her with me. Not just the ring, but what she gave me, the space to be seen. The space to matter. I believed the ring would come to me quietly, respectfully, just like she'd always been. And I didn't need to fight for it. I trusted what she'd said. I held on to that trust like a thread between us, even as the world moved on. But some threads fray without you realizing it. And by the time I discovered what my parents had done, it wasn't just the ring that felt lost. It was something deeper, something harder to get back. After the funeral, things moved quickly. My parents didn't grieve in the way I expected. There were logistics, legal papers, guest lists for the post-service reception. My mother took charge like it was a company event. My father cracked quiet jokes to lighten the mood, as if we were at a reunion, not a farewell. And Rachel, she smiled through it all, basking in the sympathy. People kept saying how beautiful she looked in black. I stayed mostly quiet. No one asked me how I was holding up. Not really. They assumed I was fine. I was always fine. I didn't cry in public. I didn't demand anything. That made things easier for them. About a week later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen. I was walking past on my way to the back door when I heard my mom say, "Well, it's not like Lena even wears jewelry. That ring would just sit in a drawer." My stomach tightened. Then my dad, "Exactly, Rachel, actually appreciates things like that. And we already had it appraised. Did you hear what the guy offered?" I didn't hear the number. I didn't care. That wasn't the point. It hit me in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. They'd pawned the ring. The one thing that ever felt like mine in that family. The one promise I had from someone who truly saw me. They'd sold it for cash. I didn't say anything that day. I wanted to. My throat burned with all the things I could have screamed, but I knew how that would go. They'd dismiss it, downplay it, turn it into a lecture about being practical or not making things sentimental, or worse, they'd say I misunderstood, that it wasn't really promised to me, that grandma never said it. I could already hear the script. I'd lived with it my whole life, because in our house, Rachel was the one you did things for. She got the new clothes, the better phone, the car when she turned 18. Not because she asked, though she always did, but because my parents thought she needed those things to keep shining. She was fragile. According to them, sensitive, emotional. I was the strong one. The one who didn't break, so when she forgot deadlines or failed a class, they'd hire a tutor. When I stayed up all night studying, they said I was too intense and needed to relax. She got birthday parties at restaurants, with balloons and gift bags. I got family dinners at home. She cried when she didn't get her way. I swallowed my disappointments so no one had to deal with them. It wasn't one big betrayal. It was 1,000 small ones. And this was just the one that finally made it impossible to ignore. They'd taken something sacred and handed it over like it meant nothing. And not just to a stranger, to Rachel. She didn't even ask about it. Or if she did, it didn't occur to her to ask me. Maybe she didn't know what that ring meant to me, or maybe she did, and it didn't matter. That thought sat heavy on me for days. I wanted to believe it wasn't her fault. That maybe she just got caught in their current. But deep down, I also knew Rachel had always understood exactly how the tides flowed in our family, and she'd never once tried to swim against them for my sake. I was left with the silence again. The kind where you know speaking will only make things worse, so I did what I'd always done. I pretended to be fine. I smiled at dinner. I helped my mom organize grandma's remaining things. I hugged Rachel goodbye when she left for a spa weekend to recover from the emotional stress. Meanwhile, I lay awake at night, holding the one thing of grandma's I'd managed to keep, a small handwritten recipe card she'd tucked into one of my books when I left for college. It read, "Be gentle with yourself. You are allowed to feel everything." I read that line over and over because I did feel everything, but no one else seemed to notice. The favoritism wasn't new. But the ring that crossed a line I hadn't realized they were even capable of crossing. It told me something I hadn't wanted to accept until then, that I didn't matter to them in the way I thought I did. Not really. Not unless I was useful. Not unless I made things easier. Not unless I could be proud of them in a way that reflected back on them, but just me. By myself, quiet, observant, careful, me, I didn't count. Not enough to honor a promise made to a grieving granddaughter. Not enough to preserve something sacred. Not enough to say, this was meant for you. That realization didn't crush me, it hollowed me out. And once I was hollow, I could finally hear the sound of something I'd ignored for too long, the voice inside me asking, why are you still trying to earn their love? I didn't have an answer. Not yet, but for the first time, I was starting to understand that being the strong one didn't mean I had to carry everything they threw away. I wish I could say I confronted them the moment I found out. That I stood up for myself right then, laid everything out on the table, and demanded answers, but I didn't. I didn't say a word. Instead, I stayed silent and waited for them to mention it, to explain, to bring it up like adults who had done something difficult, something they weren't proud of. I thought maybe they'd come to me and say, we didn't handle this well, or we weren't thinking clearly. I thought maybe some part of them would remember what that ring had meant to Grandma, and to me. But weeks passed, then a month, and nothing came. I finally asked one afternoon. I waited until we were alone, my mom and I, asked gently, like I was trying not to startle a wild animal. Did you keep Grandma's ring after the funeral? She didn't even blink. Oh that. No, we sold it. We needed some extra cash for the trip. You know how expensive everything is now. Just like that, no hesitation. No apology. No awareness that something sacred had been treated like a pawnshop trinket. I remember standing there, trying to keep my face still while everything inside me was folding in on itself. I asked, you sold it for the vacation? And she shrugged. It was just a ring, Lena. She had lots of things. You're always so sentimental. That word again, sentimental. Like it was a weakness. Like caring too much about something small made you silly. Like holding on to meaning was something to be corrected. I didn't trust myself to say anything else, so I nodded. Just nodded. Then I excused myself, went to the guest bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub until the air in my lungs stopped shaking. I knew they didn't get it. But what hit me harder was the realization that they never even tried to. That ring wasn't about the stone or the band or even the fact that Grandma had promised it to me. It was about history. About the only person in my life who ever made me feel seen. That ring was part of her voice, part of the way she made love feel solid and real. Even in a family that always rushed past it. But to them, it was just something to convert into plane tickets and hotel stays. They used the money for a trip to Spain, a 12-day escape from grief. They called it. I saw the photos online later, my parents posing in front of fountains, Rachel on a yacht, everyone glowing in white linen, with glasses of wine and captions about healing. Healing. I didn't even know what that meant to them anymore. I wasn't invited. There wasn't even a conversation. No, do you want to come? No, this might be good for us as a family. Nothing. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out of something big, but this time felt different. This time it wasn't just a dinner or a holiday. This time it was built on the remains of something that had been mine. I could have confronted them later, but I didn't. I couldn't stand the idea of explaining why it mattered. Explaining love to people who only spoke in transactions. I started writing a letter instead, not to send, just to write. I wrote, you sold something sacred and called it practical. You erased a promise and said I was being dramatic. You traded memory for luxury, and I stayed quiet because I knew it wouldn't matter to you. But it mattered to me, and I think it would have mattered to her. I folded the letter up and tucked it into a journal. That became my ritual, writing things I couldn't say. Words they wouldn't hear even if I screamed them. In that same journal, I wrote down the exact words Grandma said when she gave me that promise. I'd replayed them in my mind so many times. They felt etched into my bones. You'll have this after me. Not because it's expensive, but because you see people. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not friends. Not coworkers. I carried it around like a stone in my chest that never made a sound when it dropped. But everything started feeling heavier after that. Conversations with my parents became shorter, more measured. My responses turned into one-word answers. I couldn't look at Rachel the same way. She texted me a few days after the trip. Spain was amazing. Wish you had come. There was a photo attached. Her wearing a gold necklace with a pendant that looked just familiar enough to twist something in me. I didn't respond, because I knew deep down I had never been part of that world. Not the one they lived in. Not the one where I belonged at the center of anything. And now, even the one thing I'd held on to, the last piece of someone who made me feel worthy, was gone. Not lost. Not stolen. Given away by people who were supposed to protect it. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge yet. I didn't know where to put the weight of it, so I held it in my hands for a while, this ache. This disbelief. This quiet fury. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to let it go. I let it stay. There's a strange kind of grief that comes when the people who are supposed to love you can't even see you. It doesn't show up all at once. It creeps in slowly, settling in the corners of your mind, and making itself at home. You start second-guessing everything, not just what they did, but who you are, because if it really hurt that much, maybe you are just too sensitive. Maybe you are too emotional. Maybe they're right. That's where I was after the ring. I carried it in my chest like a stone. I couldn't spit out. I tried to bury it under work, errands, polite phone calls, and tightly managed smiles, but it didn't go away. It got heavier. There was one night, not long after that conversation with my mother, when I sat in my car in their driveway for over 20 minutes. I'd come over for dinner. Rachel was in town, and my mom made it clear it would mean a lot if I showed up. So I did. Out of habit, out of obligation. Out of that leftover piece of me that still wanted to be part of something that had never really made room for me. I stared at the porch light, watching it flicker, slightly in the breeze. I kept thinking, maybe I'll bring it up tonight. Maybe if I say it calmly, they'll finally hear me, so I did. After dinner, I waited until the plates were cleared and Rachel had gone to the living room. My parents were in the kitchen, talking about some renovation project they wanted to do on the house. And I stepped in like I was walking into water I wasn't sure would hold me. I said, I need to talk about the ring. They both paused. My mom frowned. What ring? I said, Grandma's ring. The one she promised me. The one you sold. My dad gave a half laugh, like I'd brought up something slightly embarrassing. My mom just shook her head. Oh, Lena, we already talked about this. It wasn't personal. I said, but it was personal. To me. She gave me that look I'd seen 1,000 times before, tight-lipped. Slightly annoyed. The kind that says, here we go again. We were grieving, she said. We needed a break. You know how tense things were. Why are you bringing this up now? Because it never left me. Because it still hurt. Because I needed them to care. But instead, my father stepped in and said something I can still hear word for word. You've always had a tendency to hold on to things, Lena. It's not healthy. Let it go. It was just a ring. That phrase again. Just a ring. I stood there, stunned. I don't think I spoke for several seconds. Then I said, she promised it to me. And my mother, without blinking, replied, well, maybe she meant something. Else you always read too much into things. Too much, too emotional, too sensitive. Always to something. That's when I realized they weren't going to hear me. Not really. Not the version of me that felt things deeply and remembered promises and expected love to mean more than convenience. They didn't see that person. They saw the girl who never caused trouble. The one who didn't need anything. The one who kept showing up no matter how many times they pushed her aside. I left early that night. Rachel texted me later asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I didn't have the words to explain the shape of what I was feeling. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was disorientation. Like I'd been walking on ground I thought was solid, and suddenly it wasn't. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if any of it had ever been real. Had Grandma really promised it to me? Had I misunderstood? Was I really just being dramatic? I turned those questions over in my head for weeks, trying to find some anchor. But every time I brought it up to myself or to them, it was met with dismissal. Quiet gaslighting that made me question my own memory. Eventually, I stopped trying. I didn't stop feeling it. I just stopped showing it. I learned to nod and smile and keep my voice steady even when my stomach turned. I went through birthdays, holidays, and phone calls, with that same weight in my chest. I kept thinking it would fade. That I'd wake up one day and it wouldn't matter anymore. But it did matter. Not because of the ring itself, but because of what it revealed. What it confirmed. I wasn't just the child they overlooked. I was the one they depended on not to react. The one who absorbed the shocks quietly, so they didn't have to feel guilty or uncomfortable. And the more I gave them that, the more they expected it. That realization didn't hit all at once. It unfolded slowly, in quiet moments, folding laundry in my apartment, answering their calls with a fake cheerful tone, scrolling through Rachel's posts about her amazing family. Moments that used to sting now settled like cold facts. They weren't going to change. And they weren't going to make space for the version of me that hurt. So I stopped trying to speak into a silence that only ever echoed back shame. But even as I went quiet on the outside, something inside me was starting to wake up. Something that didn't want to be ignored anymore. Not by them, and not by me. The silence that followed wasn't just mine. It became the air between us, the kind of stillness that isn't peaceful, but hollow. I didn't bring up the ring again. I didn't expect an apology. I stopped expecting anything. Really, what surprised me most wasn't that my parents dismissed my pain. I'd learned how to live with that. What hurt more was Rachel. I thought just once, she might have said something. Even privately. Even if it was awkward. She'd watched the whole thing unfold from the comfort of her usual spotlight, and she didn't say a word. I waited. I checked my phone every morning for a message that never came. I showed up at family dinners, half hoping she'd pull me aside, lower her voice, and say, "I'm sorry they did that. It was wrong." But all she ever said was, "You've been quiet lately." As if that was the problem. My quiet. Not what caused it. Our cousins came into town around that time. My mom organized a small get-together, nothing fancy, just food, music, the usual surface level, catching up. I went because I didn't want to give them more reasons to call me distant, but the whole night felt off. Or maybe I was just finally seeing things clearly. I overheard one of my aunts asking my mom what was going on with me. Her voice wasn't concerned. It was amused, curious in that passive, gossipy way people get when someone stops playing the part they've been assigned. My mom's answer. "Oh, Lena's always been a little dramatic. You know how she gets, she holds grudges over the weirdest things." That was the moment something inside me fully snapped. Not in an angry, explosive way, but in a cold, clean one. Like a rope finally breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. She'd rewritten the story before I even had a chance to tell it. And no one challenged her. No one asked what really happened. No one asked me. I stood in that kitchen, surrounded by voices that never seemed to include mine. And I realized I wasn't misunderstood. I was erased. Rachel didn't come to my defense. She didn't even look up from her glass. Later, I heard her laughing with one of our cousins, saying, "You know, Lena, she internalizes everything." She said it with a smile. Like it was endearing. Like my pain was a personality quirk. I wanted to scream, but more than that, I wanted to disappear. Not in a dramatic way, just to stop existing where I clearly didn't matter. After that, I started pulling away in ways that weren't obvious. I skipped a birthday brunch. I stopped initiating calls. I responded to texts with one-word replies. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't mention it. My world shrank, but strangely, it also became clearer. The noise of pretending faded, and underneath all of it, what remained was a simple truth I could no longer ignore. I was alone in this family, not just misunderstood, not just neglected. Alone. I thought maybe an aunt would reach out, or a cousin I'd grown up with. I thought someone might say, "Hey, are you okay?" But I realized those bonds were never as solid as I'd imagined. Most of them kept close to the center, my parents, Rachel because it was easier, safer. Why risk anything for the quiet one who never made a scene? That's the thing no one tells you about being the strong one. It becomes a prison. People leave you in the dark because they assume you can light your own way. But strength without support just becomes silence. And silence, over time, turns into a kind of erasure. It wasn't just about the ring anymore. It was about every small moment that added up to this truth that I was only included when it was convenient. Only valued when I was useful. Never loved for just being me. I remember sitting in my apartment one night, rereading old messages from Grandma. She used to write me letters, actual handwritten notes, even when texting was easier. One of them said, "If you ever feel invisible, know this. The people who love with the quietest hearts leave the deepest marks. You're not unseen, sweetheart. You're just surrounded by the wrong mirrors." I held on to that line like it was oxygen. Because in that moment, I needed to believe that my reflection wasn't broken, just ignored. I wasn't going to beg anymore. Not for understanding. Not for acknowledgement. And especially not for love. That came with conditions. And yet, a part of me still ached. Not because I wanted them back, but because I wished, deep down, that at least one of them had chosen differently. That someone in that family had stood up and said, "Wait, this isn't right," but none of them did. Not even my sister. The first time I skipped a holiday, no one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. Thanksgiving came, and I told them I had a work project due. Which wasn't a lie, but in the past, I would have tried to finish early, rearranged things, made it work. That year, I didn't bother. I heated up soup, watched a documentary, and fell asleep before dessert would have been served. It wasn't the quiet that surprised me. It was how easy it was to accept. There wasn't a single text from Rachel, not even a check-in. My mom posted photos of the table gold place settings, wine glasses, candles burning perfectly. My seat was still set, but they didn't mention I was missing. Just hashtags about family and gratitude under photos where everyone smiled to hard. Christmas came, then my birthday. Same thing. Each time I waited for some small flicker of effort, a call, a message, anything that might say, "We miss you, we see you," but they came and went like calendar reminders that never triggered. That was the year I stopped going home. Not because of one big blowout or confrontation, but because I realized that being there had started to mean disappearing more than staying away. Ever could. It's strange how grief can sit in the same room as peace. I missed the idea of family more than I missed the people. I missed what we were supposed to be. And yet, the more distance I put between us, the more clearly I could breathe. Still, the ache didn't disappear overnight. I carried it in my chest, heavy and dull. There were days when I caught myself instinctively reaching for the phone, thinking maybe this time someone would remember something meaningful, a story, a promise. They didn't. But something started to shift, slowly, quietly. I began writing again. Not just scraps in the margins of bills or half-thoughts on my phone, but full entries. Pages. I kept a journal by my bed, and each night, I poured everything into it, not just what had happened, but how it made me feel. How long I'd swallowed disappointment, how deeply I'd learned to apologize for wanting anything. Some days I wrote for hours, other days, just one line. One night I wrote, "I used to think being strong meant staying silent. Now I think it might mean listening to the part of me that's still hurting and not abandoning her this time." That line stayed with me. There's something about writing that doesn't ask permission. I didn't have to convince anyone I was allowed to feel the way I did. I didn't have to explain why the ring mattered, or why Rachel's silence cut deeper than my mother's cruelty. The page didn't argue or minimize. It just held what I gave it. And in that holding, I started to change. I still answered calls sometimes, though I stopped initiating. I let texts go unread. I watched their lives continue from the outside, diners, trips, family announcements. My name was rarely mentioned. I became the cousin who worked too much, the daughter who was off doing her own thing. That narrative suited them. It let them avoid the truth. But for the first time, I didn't correct it. Let them think what they want. I wrote one evening. They never asked who I really was anyway. As the year passed, my solitude became less about hiding, and more about healing. I found comfort in routines that were entirely mine: weekend walks, library trips, dinners cooked just for me. I lit candles for no reason. I bought myself a necklace with a stone that reminded me of her ring, not to replace it, but to reclaim the feeling. Every small thing became a quiet rebellion, a decision to care for myself in all the ways they never did. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. But the internal shift was real. I was still grieving. Not just the ring. Not just Grandma, but the idea that one day, my family would wake up and realize they'd gotten it wrong. That they'd call and say, "We didn't see you before, but we do now." That call never came. And slowly, I stopped needing it. It didn't happen with fireworks. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on my couch with tea and a book, realizing I hadn't thought about them in hours. That piece, however small, had taken up space where sorrow used to live. I flipped back through the pages of my journal. It was filled now, covered in handwriting that didn't tremble. And on the last page I wrote, "They forgot me. I remember me. That's enough for now." And it was almost it happened by accident. I wasn't looking for ITAT, least not out loud. I had stopped believing I'd ever see it again. I had done the right thing by letting it go, or so I told myself. The kind of mature silenced people expect from you when you've been labeled as the strong one. I thought I had made peace with that loss. But somewhere deep down, I still carried the shape of it. I was walking past a pawn shop on a Saturday afternoon. It was a neighborhood I didn't usually visit, but I'd taken a wrong turn and decided to make the most of the detour. There wasn't anything special about the storefront. It had that usual cluttered feel, with mismatched items in the window, old watches, second-hand tools, a shelf of dusty figurines, and there, tucked between two gaudy bracelets, was a ring, a small rose gold band, garnet stone, slightly tilted setting. I stood, frozen for a moment. Not shocked, exactly. More like still, like something inside me had clicked into place without warning. I walked in quietly, as if I were disturbing something sacred. I didn't ask if it was hers. I didn't need to. There was a nick on the underside of the band, something I remembered, her pointing out once, after she'd caught it on the garden gate. That tiny imperfection had made the ring more real to me. It wasn't a perfect heirloom, it was lived in, worn with purpose. The shop owner didn't say much. I didn't explain. I just asked for the price. It wasn't cheap, but it also wasn't impossible. I didn't haggle. I handed over the money, accepted the small box, and walked out with shaking hands. And for the first time in a long time, I cried, not out of grief or bitterness, but out of something closer to relief. Not because I had the ring back, because I had chosen to get it back. No, one had handed it to me. No one had made it right for me. I did that. Quietly, without fanfare, without an audience, I brought her back to me. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment and held the ring like it was breathing. I didn't put it on right away. I just sat with it. Let it speak in the silence. She had told me once, this ring isn't about money, it's about memory. It's about knowing where you come from, and where you're going. I understood that now in a way I hadn't before. I didn't buy the ring to throw it in my mother's face. I didn't plan to show it to Rachel. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about her, and me, and the space she left in me that no one else had ever tried to fill. I wore it the next day, not as an announcement, but as armor, not to prove anything, but to remember who I was when I was with her, seen, safe, enough. Something softened in me after that. Not toward them, but toward myself. I started walking taller. Answering more honestly when people asked how I was, not spilling everything, but not lying either. I stopped avoiding mirrors. I let myself believe that reclaiming the ring meant I could start reclaiming other parts, two parts, I had let wither to make room for their comfort. I wore it to work. Number 1 commented. But I felt different. A little more steady, a little less invisible. It sat warm on my hand when I typed, when I reached for my tea, when I opened my journal at night. I started sleeping better. I didn't tell anyone in my family, not because I was hiding it, but because they hadn't earned the right to know. They had already told their version of the story, dismissed, downplayed, deleted. I didn't owe them a rewrite. What I held now was a truth they could never touch. She had meant it for me. I had never imagined that. I had remembered it, trusted it, and even though they tried to turn that promise into cash, it still found its way home, not because they gave it back, but because I refused to forget who it belonged to. There was no apology, no justice served, no dramatic reveal, just a small circle of gold. And a quiet woman sitting alone in her apartment, finally starting to feel whole again. It wasn't the end, it was something smaller, a beginning I chose for myself. The ring stayed with me, not just on my hand, but in how I started showing up in the world. I didn't talk about it, but it changed something. Or maybe it returned something, some part of myself I thought I'd lost trying to keep the peace. Around that time, I left my job. It wasn't impulsive. I'd been feeling it for a while, this quiet itch under my skin. I worked in branding and design for a mid-size firm downtown. It paid the bills. I was good at it. But I wasn't proud of anything I made. It was all sanitized and committee-approved, nothing personal, nothing real. I started sketching at night. At first, it was just for myself. Shapes, color studies, small ideas. Then it turned into logo drafts, packaging concepts. Things I imagined for clients who didn't exist yet. I remembered how Grandma used to arrange her teacups by color and how she pressed flowers into pages of her cookbooks. She wasn't a designer, but she saw beauty. She arranged things with care, with meaning. I started naming my ideas after her little code words in the margins of my notebooks. Then one day, I took a risk. I printed 5 of my concepts, packaged them in simple craft folders, and sent them to local women-owned businesses in town. No pitch. Just a handwritten note. If this inspires anything in you, I'd love to collaborate. I didn't expect much, but one of them responded. A boutique, florist Lena's Blooms, ironically enough. We met for coffee, and by the end of the week, she'd hired me to rebrand her entire shop. That project changed everything. It wasn't about the paycheck though, it helped. It was that someone trusted me to shape something from the ground up, and not with rules or layers of approval, but with creative freedom. I poured everything into it, more than a color palette or a new logo. I listened. I asked questions no one else had asked her. I gave her something that felt like her. After the launch, she hugged me and said, "You don't just design, you translate people." That sentence sat with me for weeks. Word started to spread. Slowly, then steadily. A jewelry maker emailed me. Then a small cafe. Then a wellness coach who was starting her own retreat space. By the end of the year, I had 3 clients on retainer, a wait list, and a side income that made me start to wonder if I could do this full time. I still had doubts. I still wrestled with whether it was a fluke or if I was just getting lucky. But one person changed that. Her name was Marin. She ran a design-focused startup and had stumbled across my work through a mutual client. She asked if I'd consider doing consulting for her brand, something long-term, more strategic. Our first meeting lasted for hours. Marin didn't just see my work. She saw me. She asked about my process, my values, what lit me up. She told me I had something rare, a way of making people feel safe in their own ideas. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. We started working together a few weeks later. She didn't micromanage. She challenged me. She asked real questions. The kind that made me rethink how I approached everything, not just the projects, but my worth. One night after a deadline, I stayed late at the studio she let me use. She stopped by to drop off tea and said, "No, you're not just a freelancer anymore, right? You're a brand." The word made me pause. A brand. For so long, I'd been someone else's extra, someone's reliable backup. The one who filled in the emotional gaps, held the peace, asked for nothing. But now, I was building something that had my name on it. Not their name, not their approval. Mine. I called the business Quiet North Studio. North, because that's what Grandma used to say when I was lost. Find your own north, sweetheart. You're not here to follow someone else's map. And quiet because I wasn't loud. I didn't want to be, but I was steady. I listened. I built from the inside out. I designed a logo that felt like home and launched my first website with my palms, sweating. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It was real. People found me through word of mouth, through trust. I didn't advertise much. I didn't chase visibility. I stayed slow, deliberate, and clients kept coming. Some days, when I finished a call, I'd catch myself reaching for the ring, twisting it slowly the way Grandma used to. It became my anchor. Not because it made me feel powerful, but because it reminded me I already was. My parents didn't know. Rachel didn't ask, but that was the thing. I stopped waiting for them to see me. I saw me, and for the first time, that was enough to keep going. Even if it still hurt sometimes. Even if the silence hadn't left completely. I was building something from it. Something they couldn't take credit for. Something they wouldn't understand, but I didn't build it for them. I built it for her and for me. The first time I heard about the foreclosure, I didn't believe it. It came up casually through someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A former neighbor messaged me out of the blue, asking if I knew what was happening with my parents' house. She said she saw a notice pinned to their front gate during her walk. I almost deleted the message. Part of me didn't want to know. I'd spent years building a life that no longer revolved around them, but curiosity has a way of creeping in when you think you're past the point of caring. So I looked into it. Quietly, it didn't take much. Public records have a way of exposing things no one wants to admit. Their mortgage had been refinanced twice. There were missed payments, legal notices, and now, a final warning. Unless the debt was cleared or sold, the house would be taken within 90 days. It felt surreal. This was the house where I learned how to tie my shoes, where Grandma read to me on the porch, where birthdays had been celebrated and ignored, where I'd learned to keep quiet and stay small. And now it was hanging by a thread. There was no announcement, no family group message, no call for help, which told me two things. 1, they were embarrassed, and 2, they still didn't think I needed to know. Or maybe they assumed I couldn't do anything about it. But they were wrong on both counts. I didn't make a decision that night. I sat with it. I ran my fingers across the ring on my hand and thought about what it would mean to step into this moment, not from spite, but from strength. I wasn't the same girl who had waited for permission to be seen, and I didn't need revenge served loud. I didn't need shouting or grand gestures. What I wanted was something quieter, something undeniable, so I called a lawyer. One I trusted through a client I'd helped earlier that year. I explained the situation, asked for discretion, and laid out my conditions. Everything had to go through a holding firm. My name could never appear in the documents. I wanted no contact, just clean ownership of the mortgage note. He didn't blink, just said, "We can do that." It happened fast after that, turns out. People are eager to hand over problems when they think no one's looking. I watched the paperwork move through systems that had once felt far away from me. And with each form signed, I felt the ground shift just a little more beneath my feet. 2 weeks later, it was official. I owned the debt on my parents' home, not through manipulation, not through force, just by being ready. When no one expected me to be. They had no idea, and I didn't tell them. They went on with their lives, still posting, still pretending, still clinging to the story that they had it all together. But I saw the letters being delivered. I knew the clock was ticking, and I didn't rush it. I wasn't interested in taking the house. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted the truth to sit quietly in the room with them, the kind of truth that doesn't scream, but lingers. They still thought they held the upper hand, still thought I was the daughter they'd long since faded into the background. They didn't know who had stepped in. They didn't know whose name had replaced the banks on the contract, but I did, and that was enough. Now, the first letter went out quietly. It was professional, simple, polite, a formal notice from the holding firm I'd use, detailing the past due balance, the interest accrued, the terms of repayment. It was nothing personal, just business. And I meant it that way. I didn't want this to feel like revenge. Not yet. I wanted it to feel like reality finally catching up. I had the firm send everything through certified mail. Tracked, recorded. No room for confusion or excuses. And still, I heard nothing. A second letter followed, then a third. Each one more direct than the last. Grace periods ended. Fees began stacking. The tone shifted from neutral to firm. And still nothing. My parents didn't respond, not to the firm. Not to the deadlines. Not to the notices stamped in bold across envelopes. Instead, they ignored it. They kept posting brunch photos. Complaining about inflation. Acting like their world was intact, untouched. I knew them too well to be surprised. They'd built a life on performance. When something uncomfortable showed up, they didn't confront it, they delayed, denied, dismissed. To them, this was just a bureaucratic inconvenience. A shuffle of paperwork, some faceless lender they could smooth talk or outwait. They didn't know the lender wasn't faceless. They didn't know it was me. That every deadline they ignored was mine. That every late fee piling onto their balance was my quiet boundary finally taking form. Rachel called me once that month. Just once. She didn't mention the house or the letters. She asked if I'd heard about a new restaurant opening near their neighborhood. Casual. Detached. I listened to her ramble for 5 minutes, then said I had work to finish. She didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask about my life. She never did. I hung up and wondered if she knew. If maybe the letters had come, and they were hiding it from her, or maybe they all knew and thought. I was still too weak to do anything with what I knew. But I didn't need them to know yet. I wasn't rushing this. Some things need to simmer. Letting the notices stack was part of the process, not to be cruel, but to give the silence back to them after all the years they had fed me mine. And the irony, of course, was that they'd always prided themselves on being financially responsible. My father loved to give lectures about credit scores and budgeting. My mother used to say, appearances matter, no one needs to know if things are tight. They were still clinging to appearances, but the walls were thinning, because behind their silence, the numbers were changing, the fees were compounding. The language in the letters was turning colder, more urgent. I didn't need to raise my voice. They were making the noise for me. Every day they ignored what was right in front of them, and still, I waited, calmly, because I knew the moment would come, the one where silence wouldn't protect them anymore, and when it did, I would be ready. When the final notice went out, I didn't flinch. It was time. There's a kind of calm that comes when you've already made peace with being misunderstood. I wasn't there for revenge. I wasn't looking to prove a point. I just wanted the truth to sit in front of them, undeniable, irreversible, and unadorned. They had ignored the letters, ignored the warnings, pushed aside the mounting debt like it was just another inconvenience that would eventually sort itself out. But I hadn't disappeared. I had simply grown quieter and sharper. When I pulled up that morning, I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me thought they might still wave it off, tell themselves the bank had made a mistake, that they could talk their way out of it, like they always had, but I didn't come as their daughter. I came as the woman who now owned the title to their house. I walked to the door and knocked. Firm. Once. No rush. My mother answered. Her eyes flickered with confusion. Then something like suspicion. Lena. I nodded. Can we talk? She hesitated. But the door opened. Inside, everything looked the same. The framed pictures, the two bright lamps, the sofa no one was ever allowed to eat on. My father came into the room, his smile already tense. What's this about? I sat down across from them and set the envelope on the table, a thick manila one, unsealed. Neither of them reached for it. I'm not here for a fight, I said. I just wanted you to know who's been sending the letters. Their faces didn't move. I kept my voice steady. The mortgage was bought by a private firm. I'm the one who owns it. The house is in my hands now. My mother blinked like she hadn't heard me. My father's lips parted, then closed again. I let the silence stretch, not to be cruel but to let the weight of it land. Everything they'd ignored had come from me, and they hadn't even noticed. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was thin. You did what? I bought the debt, I said, legally, quietly, because I could. She looked at my father like he might correct me. He didn't. I didn't come here to evict you, I added. I came to end the pretending. I pushed the envelope forward. My mother didn't touch it, but her eyes didn't leave it. Inside was the full deed, notarized. The ring sat on top, her mother's ring. The one she'd called just a ring. Neither of them moved. I watched the shift in their eyes. Realization without any place to land. They couldn't hide behind confusion now. You sold something that was never yours to sell, I said. And you spent years telling me it didn't matter. But it did. Not because of the money. Not because of tradition. Because of what it meant. And you knew that. No one interrupted. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. Because I had already spoken the only language they truly understood: ownership, control, consequence. Still. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not here for your apology, I said. I don't expect one. But from this moment on, you'll never be able to say you didn't know who I was. They still hadn't opened the envelope. It didn't matter. The truth was already out. And this time, they had no place to send it back. They didn't open the envelope right away. They just stared at it like it might bite. My father's hands stayed, locked on the arms of his chair, his jaw set the way it always was when control slipped through his fingers. My mother sat back with the same forced composure I'd seen at funerals and family dinners. When things didn't go her way, they didn't say anything at first. Not a thank you. Not a question. Just silence. Until finally my mother whispered, almost to herself, "We didn't know you were this." She didn't finish the sentence. I don't know what word she was reaching for. Cold, calculated, powerful, capable. It didn't matter. I just said, "I know." Because that had always been the problem. They never bothered to see what was beneath the surface. They only knew the version of me that kept her voice quiet to keep the peace. The daughter, who stepped aside so others could shine. The one who never asked for anything that couldn't be wrapped in politeness. I waited for Rachel to say something, but she hadn't moved. She was standing by the wall, arms crossed, her face tight in a way I hadn't seen before. I thought she might be angry, but then, her lip trembled. And then she cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just one of those still, almost childlike breakdowns, the kind that comes when something you've always believed about the world suddenly breaks. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the floor. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know they did that to you." I believed her, not because it excused anything but because I had learned that silence can be inherited, too, that people raised on favoritism rarely question the air they breathe until someone else holds a mirror up to it. I didn't answer right away. There was a time I would have rushed in, would have softened the moment, made it easier for her. Assured, her protected her from the discomfort of seeing the truth. But not now. I let her cry. Let her sit with the weight of it. Then I said, "I forgave you a long time ago." Her head lifted just slightly, but that doesn't mean I forgot. No one spoke after that. Not for a while. It wasn't the dramatic fallout you'd expect. No one begged. No one threw accusations. It was heavier than that. Quieter I stood. Neither of them stopped me, and that, more than anything, told me how deeply the truth had landed. They couldn't undo what they'd done, they couldn't even name it. But now they had to live with it, and, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the silence. They were. Some stories don't end with a final confrontation, they end in quiet decisions that reshape the rest of your life. I walked away from that house not feeling triumphant, not even relieved, just steady. Like I had finally returned to something I didn't know I was missing. My own center. The version of me that existed long before I started editing myself to survive other people's comfort zones. For years, I thought I wanted an apology, that if I could just hear the words, "We were wrong. You mattered too. We see you now," something would unlock in me. But standing in front of them, seeing the disbelief in their eyes, the weight of silence pressing down after the truth was finally spoken, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I didn't want revenge. I never did. I wanted peace. I wanted the quiet kind of justice, the kind that doesn't humiliate or destroy, but simply replaces what was taken. The ring still sits on my hand. I wear it every day, not for style, not for nostalgia, but because it reminds me of her. Of how she saw me before anyone else ever did. How she gave me love with no performance required. That ring isn't heavy with loss anymore. It's steady with purpose. I still keep her notes. Her handwriting is fading now, delicate loops of ink on old recipe cards, birthday letters, little reminders she used to tuck into my coat pockets when I was younger. The last one I ever received simply read, "You are more than they can see. Keep going." I did. And I still am. I decided to start a scholarship in her name. Quiet North Foundation. 1 grant a year, given to a young woman from a small town, who wants to build something of her own. Art, business, music, doesn't matter. All that matters is that she wants to create something that reflects who she is, not who someone else told her to be. I used to think legacy had to be big, loud, something you announced. Now I think it's the opposite. It's the little things you pour into other people that continue long after you're gone. Every time I sign a scholarship letter, I think of her garden, of the way she brewed tea without rushing, the way she listened, the way she let me sit in silence without trying to fix it. That's the legacy I want to leave, not the ring, or the mortgage, or the victory, but the steadiness, the strength that isn't loud, but lasting. I don't speak to my parents often. The door is there, but I don't keep it open wide. Some bridges aren't meant to be burned, but they also aren't meant to be crossed again. Rachel wrote me a letter a few months after the visit. She said she was trying to do better. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I believed her. Sometimes we write ourselves into new lives, one sentence at a time. I replied simply, "That's enough for now." And for once, it felt true. I still catch myself, now and then, waiting for their approval out of old habit. A project launches, an award gets announced, and there's a split second where I imagine calling them. But I don't. I sit with the feeling, I honor it, and then I let it pass. Because I don't need them to see it anymore. I do, I built it. I'm still building it, and I'm doing it in her name, and in mine.